February 2020, and you're watching The Lookout, a production of the Division of World Languages and Cultural Studies here at Minot State University. I'm your host, Samuel Stinson. On the program today, we have Charlie Young, an assistant professor of music here at MSU. We also have Sophia Rammell, assistant professor of Spanish and Linguistics, Jean-Francois Mondon, an associate professor of French, German, Latin, and Linguistics at MSU, and visiting artist Christina Anderson to promote her upcoming show. It's a great program. Stay tuned. We're sitting here with Charlie Young, an assistant professor of music here at Minot State. Charlie, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So to prepare for this interview, I was watching your 2-minute lecture from last year. And I remember this because you related a personal story about having to memorize a piece for performance.
I took several months in order to prepare for the audition portion of the competition, which was held in probably late fall. And was able to put together it's about a 12 to 15 minute work. I can't remember precisely, but it's pretty substantial work. A winning performance of that piece from memory. After having kind of reached that peak of winning the competition, I felt like, okay, I've got this thing licked. I know it front and back. But there's something unique about performing in different situations in front of different people, that different distractions, different things go through the mind. And not too many weeks after that, I gave a recital performance. So it was a public performance for a public audience. And that situation comes with different stressors. And so it kind of, it got to me in the moment of that performance and sort of melted down a little bit. I found out that I didn't know it as securely as I thought I did. I knew it well enough to get through it, but not well enough to get through it no matter what. So that was a real eye-opening moment in my musical pursuits and preparations.
So could you tell us a little bit more about why you chose music? What was it about music that drew you as a career, as a profession?
Sure. So I entered studying instrumental music about 4th grade, which was when my band program started. And I picked up the saxophone. That was an instrument that my grandmother had played, and so I was interested in just checking out kind of what it was about. It didn't take long before even the next semester, the second semester of 4th grade, that I was asking my teacher, can I learn another instrument? I was just kind of ravenous for it. And then as I moved into high school, I was spending every weekend of the semester through the late fall and early spring traveling to clinics and honor bands and things like that. There was a point at which it became apparent that all of my other extracurriculars were just sort of taking time that I could be spending practicing. I was spending 2 or 3 periods of my 7-period day in high school in the band room, just working on stuff and getting ready for auditions. And there was a point at which it consumed my life, and I had to make a decision. I had other interests, obviously. I was very much interested in math and physics, and so envisioning my life going forward, I thought I could be happy doing one of those other pursuits, but I could never be happy not doing music. And so it was sort of the thing that I couldn't see not in my life, as much as I could have fun doing other things. And that's sort of stuck with me ever since. I mean, I've never stopped studying it. I feel like I'm still studying it right now. It took me through, like I said, picking up other instruments was always a big hobby and pursuit of mine. And so I started playing more than just the saxophone. That was my original instrument. In my undergrad, by my master's, I pursued a degree that was focused on studying 5 different instruments, with the eventual hope of getting a job like I have here at Minot State, where I end up teaching private lessons to saxophone students, clarinet students, bassoon students, oboe students, which is kind of like specializing in 5 things. It's a little more than like jack of all trades. So it's demanding, certainly, but very rewarding in that I get to sort of be a specialist in a lot of things and express my music and my art in many different ways.
So before, I'm to understand that you're going to perform a piece for us in just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get to that, do you have any upcoming performances or recitals that you'd like to mention?
Sure. Well, I've got a recital coming up at the end of March, March 30th, and I'll be performing with the members of the Luminous Trio that are faculty members here, Dr. Eric and Dr. Diana Anderson, who are cello and piano faculty here, and Dr. John Rumney, who's violin. So we'll be playing some duets, trios, and quartets, some of music that's written for our instruments and some music that I've arranged for our instruments.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for being on the program, and I'm looking forward to your performance momentarily.
Me too. Thanks. This is a work by a composer, Friedrich Kuhlau, who is an early Romantic composer, and this is a fantasia he wrote originally for flute.
Charlie, that was great. Thank you so much for giving us that performance.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Now, before we close, we have time just for a few questions. So, any questions from our peanut gallery?
Yeah, what kind of music did your grandmother play on her sax?
So, what kind of, the question I heard was, what kind of music did your grandmother play on her sax?
Sure. So she was a high school band member in Mississippi. She was a member of the Mississippi Lions All-State Band. So part of what they did at the Lions Convention each year was they developed what they called a hotel show or a lobby show. They would put together kind of show band music that they would set up in lobbies around the cities where the convention was held. And she was also a majorette, so she was saxophone player and majorette in that band. So that was a lot of what she did. And then after she put that down for a while until I started playing again. And once I moved back home to Mississippi, I was able to bring her along to community band, and so we started playing in community bands once again. So she took a long absence from the saxophone, but it was nice for us to bond over that once I started playing.
Well, Charlie, thank you again for being on the program.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back. We're here with visiting artist Christina Anderson. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
Now, I'm to understand that we just got you right off the plane into the studio just a few minutes ago.
Yes, I just got off the plane probably, 20 minutes ago. So, plane, airport, here, walk in, and yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your upcoming show. Could you talk a little bit about it and tell us more?
Okay, so I was asked to exhibit by Micah, and since I'm teaching a cyanotype workshop, I thought, well, it should probably be cyanotype prints. I do all kinds of 19th century processes, and 19th century processes means what photography was from 1839 to 1900. Most of those processes that I do now were discovered at that time, although a couple a little bit later than that. But anyway, cyanotype was one of the very first. And so we'll be teaching it tomorrow and the next day, or I think for 3 days or something. Very easy to learn, very hard to perfect. A lot of people think it's really easy and stuff, and it's not, to get a really good print. So anyway, I thought I would exhibit the work that was in the process to show what prints might look like. And the subject matter is kudzu. It's actually the altered landscape. And the altered landscape is, my interest stems back from 2003. I went to graduate school at Clemson University in the South. I had never been to the South. I grew up in Maryland, which isn't South, it's North, according to the South. And so I got down there and I had never seen kudzu before. And kudzu, if you don't, you do know what that is, right? It's that it's a plant that grows purportedly a foot a day.
Oh, wow.
And it grows over everything, all over the place. It's unchecked. If it's unchecked, it will grow over houses and trees. And anything that grows over it will kill. So it's kind of like what I call the classic femme fatale of the natural world, because it's so beautiful and the fragrance is just unbelievable, very heady sweet, purple flowers, but it will kill. And so I started photographing back in 2003, and I have been back there and photographed probably every year since then. So it's been a 16-year project. So these prints are in cyanotype of these kudzu places. And so that's what people will be seeing in the gallery.
So I don't know much about the prints, but so cyanotype is much different from something, say, for instance, daguerreotype?
Yes. Discovered or invented, depending, at about the same time, but cyanotype, daguerreotype is a little bit more dangerous toxicity, using mercury and stuff. Cyanotype is two essentially non-toxic chemicals that are mixed together, that when exposed to light, the two of them mixed together become photosensitive. So you take your paper, you brush coat it with this solution that's chartreuse green, and you expose it to light, and it will darken and make an image that's very permanent. And the rise in these processes has happened because of digital negatives, surprisingly enough. A lot of these 19th century processes have come back into practice because we can now make digital negatives to expose them. Because otherwise, since it's a contact printing process where you have to have the negative the same size as the actual image it produces, you'd have to bring out a large format camera and expose, and most people aren't walking around with large format cameras unless they go to my school, because we still teach it. And so all of a sudden, all these people that don't have that kind of equipment are able to take cell phone pictures and make a digital negative and print it in the dim room. It's not the dark room, it's the dim room. And so that's been, there's been a real resurgence of this area. And when I started in it, I was taught in 1998 by Rudy Dietrich at Montana State University. And as soon as I took that first class, I was like, this is what I will do. This is my field. And I've done nothing but for 20 years. I don't think I printed a digital print in my life. Anyway, that's no sort of quality, I'm not casting aspersions on digital photography. It's just, I do digital negatives, but I always make a handmade print. It would be the same thing, I think, a printmaker might think about a hand-pulled print through a press versus maybe printing something out of a inkjet printer. So.
If I could ask, what is it that the return to these older 19th century methods, what is it that that does for us in terms of printmaking that newer methods might not accomplish?
I think that getting your hands dirty and in something, getting, actually having the tactile experience of making art is so rewarding. It's different than pressing a button, sitting at a computer, having something come out that is infinitely reproducible, exactly the same. So I think there is something lost in the translation of digital photography that when you get your hands back in that kind of messy dark room or see the print come up in, even black and white printing, that magic is there still. And I know it's true because my students, when they come to my class, they are so engaged. And it's not my scintillating teaching, it's the fact that the process is just addictive.
You said that the photography you do was from 1839 to 1900. What happened in 1839? Is that when something was discovered, or?
So, interestingly, so in 1839, I think is the date, it was actually like 1826, I think, the actual date that Niepce did the first recording of something on a plate that was an actual photograph. But the daguerreotype is kind of considered like the start of photography. When that was announced to the world, those were one-of-a-kind photographs. And, you made a daguerreotype, it was one object. So the paper, the multiple, kind of multiplicity of photography, I would say, didn't come till later. I think I'm just terrible on dates. Don't ever ask me history questions. But it would have been the salted paper print process. I also teach that. I've written a book in salted paper printing. I've written a book on cyanotype and gum printing. But salted paper was like the first print on paper process where you could make a negative and reproduce the print over and over and over again. So once this all started, it was England and France and England and France. I'm sure Germany got in there somewhere, but those two countries really warred and vied for who discovered what first. But France probably is, they would be called, Daguerre was French. Fox Talbot was British. But they most of the discoveries came at that time, during that time, and then they were translated, and brought over to America too. So.
All right, Christina Anderson, thank you very much again for being on the program.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. We're here with Sophia Rammell, an assistant professor of Spanish and linguistics here at MSU. Sophia, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you for having me. Yes, so I look mainly at second language acquisition. So when you're learning a second language or when you're really good at a second language. So we also do neuroimaging of people who study second languages. So essentially we're taking pictures of the brain while they're learning a language, or whether they're hearing a language or speaking a language or reading a language. So some of the work I did for my dissertation was I actually looked at when you hear language in noise. So right now we're in quiet and it's really easy to understand what each other's saying. But when you're in a real life environment where you might have background speakers or you might have background noise, if you're at a busy restaurant and you hear the kitchen noise, this is a real life task that's pretty easy in your first language, but it's really, really hard in your second language. So if you even think about speaking a second language on the phone, it's always harder on the phone because it's a little bit harder to hear. So we looked at the neurological mechanisms that you use to understand when you hear a language in noise. So we looked at your first language. We also looked at your Spanish language, your second language, which is Spanish. So we found that actually when you're hearing your first language, you're kind of filling in the details as you go, but you get the general gist of what people are saying. However, when you're in your second language, you're still starting with the details and trying to put everything together. So you're starting with little pieces and trying to build up to words and then to sentences to understand what you're hearing, which would explain why it's so much harder in your second language to understand something in noise than it is in your first language.
So if I understand correctly, it might be more difficult for the second language learner to be able to differentiate the noise from the actual sounds with meaning.
Absolutely. Yes. It's a lot harder to understand something when there's a background noise going, or in particular, we didn't study this, but if you hear lots of different talkers, sometimes it's even hard to understand who's speaking and who you should be listening to.
I see. I get that sometimes when I'm watching television and I hear that crosstalk in programs in first language context.
Absolutely. It's not always perfect in your first language either when you understand noise or anything. And in fact, that's one of the biggest complaints people have as they get older and they start to lose hearing, just normal age-related hearing loss. A lot of people, their first complaint is not, I can't hear, but it's, I can't understand what people are saying. Everyone around me is mumbling. What are they saying? And usually it's that problem that they have some sort of competing noise that's making it hard to understand what they're saying.
So what was it about Spanish as a foreign language that drew you to study it?
I thought I started learning Spanish in middle school, actually, and I thought that it was a useful language. My choice was Spanish or French, and I thought more people in the U.S. spoke Spanish, so I decided to go with that and continued studying it. And now, having a PhD in Spanish linguistics, I know more about the language, and I do know I think it was probably a good choice for staying in the U.S. That's a language that a lot of people in the U.S. speak. And a lot of people across the world speak. So Spanish is a hugely common language. So that's why I kind of started with that. And then along the way, I found out I really love studying all sorts of languages. But Spanish is a good one to start with.
And we've been talking before about your work with Spanish and linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about the study of linguistics that assists or connects to your study of Spanish as a second or foreign language?
So there are things that we call individual differences, so what makes each person unique. But scientifically, you study those by looking at things like working memory capacity, looking at ability to decipher different sounds, the difference between sounds. So there are a lot of aspects of linguistics that can inform how you learn a language and what processes you use to learn a language, and maybe why some people really enjoy it and some people really don't like it. So we use different strategies to learn a language, and depending on, well, it depends on other things other than just brain strategies. You can also look at motivation and different aspects like that. I would say that I enjoy it, so that's something that I try even harder doing it than maybe some students, don't always like taking a foreign language, so maybe they aren't motivated as much as they would be, for example, in a math class. They might really be fascinated by math. That was never me. But you can certainly look at different aspects that affect how well you can learn language.
So you would say that personal investment in learning the language is definitely important in acquiring a second language?
I would say so. I would think that's an important thing to talk about. And I think, we're fortunate to live in a city that has, especially with the Air Force Base here, that has a lot of different people coming from different places. And so you can see, there's probably a benefit to learning a different language. You might be able to talk to a neighbor that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to talk to, or depending on where you are in the U.S., maybe you can speak to more people in the city that you're in than you ordinarily would have been able to as well. So I think that's a good motivation for a lot of people to be able to speak to different people and meet new friends.
So the question I heard was, why is it much easier for children to learn a foreign language than adults?
I would say it's easier for kids to learn everything than it is for adults to learn things. So when you're constantly, as you grow up, you're learning your first language as well. So kids are really good at babies are really good at learning a language. So if you're doing that same process simultaneously, if you're learning one language and another, it's just a lot easier. It's not impossible to learn a second language as an adult, but it's a lot easier to do it as a kid. And we know that there are benefits to that. So this lifelong bilingualism, we know, has cognitive benefits as time goes on and as you get older.
All right. Well, Sophia, Rammell, thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you.
We'll be back. We're here with Jean-Francois Mondon, who is an associate professor, I've got to read this, of French, German, Latin, and Linguistics at MSU. Jean-Francois, thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
And you also are known as JF sometimes.
Yes, generally because my first name has several sounds that don't exist in English, so I think it's easier for people to pronounce.
So I wanted to start by asking you also about, there's this expression that I've seen on your office door, and I've seen it on your website when I looked at your site.
Sure.
If I'm saying this right, Gnothi Siauton.
Very good, yes, Gnothi Sauton. Yep.
So what does that mean, and what exactly is that?
Sure, it means know thyself, and it comes from a work of Plato, and I guess he attributes it to Socrates, who wrote Nothing. Yeah, just know thyself. It's a quote I came across years ago, and I just really liked. And yeah, I think knowledge is key, and knowing thyself, you got to know the good aspects about yourself as well as the bad aspects.
So I'll ask you a question that I sometimes bring up in conversation when I meet new faculty, and you and I have known each other for a little time now. But what is it that, in terms of your field and study of foreign languages, what is it that brought you to foreign languages?
I always liked culture, and I really liked history, and I guess I tried learning Russian when I was in 5th or 6th grade or so, just because, I don't know, the Cyrillic alphabet was really neat looking. But then when I got to high school, I had to take Latin for 2 years, and that just did it for me. I just, language is great. Up till that point, I could not stand English grammar. I still am not a huge fan of English. I just found it boring because I speak it natively. But no, Latin was just a lot of fun. Just such a cool mathematical language, and then from there I just kept studying more and more languages, and then went to college and was fortunate to go to a place that had a linguistics department. And I think my second semester I took a course on historical linguistics, how languages change, and that brought everything I loved: history, geography, language. So that was good.
And this was in Pennsylvania?
Yes, at the University of Pennsylvania. Yeah.
So you've also lived in many places, traveled to many places. Could you talk a little bit about your experiences in other places?
Yeah, I do love traveling, and I love driving. So last summer I finally completed hitting the lower 48 states of the United States. And related to language, I found it very humorous. So I left Philadelphia last summer. I had about the midsection in the deep south I'd never been to. So I drove down south, sweat through their horrible humidity in Mississippi and Alabama. But I wanted to see where the accent, like a noticeable accent, stopped. So as I came back up north, I got up through Louisiana, it still had an accent. Arkansas had an accent. Oklahoma had the accent. And then somewhere in Nebraska, or I guess in Kansas, the accent sort of became more North Dakota, South Dakota-like. So that was just fascinating to see where that changed. But yeah, no, I just love traveling. And if I could just teach all my courses online, I would just live in hotels and just see the country.
So you have a skill in placing accents, it sounds like.
Oh God, no! No, I don't think so. I can just when something sounds different to me, but no, I'm not a sociolinguist. There are certainly some people I know who can do a much better job at that, but no. If people say certain things, or if someone tells me where they're from, I can get a sense of what I might expect from their language. But no, I would not say I'm terribly good at that.
So what do you see as some of the advantages? It sounds like you, in terms of teaching a variety of languages, what would you say are some of the advantages of having that approach, not just a single foreign language, but it sounds like you would have something where teaching one language would somehow connect to the teaching of another in some way.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think once you study linguistics, you see that pretty much all languages have the same basic template effectively. I mean, that's the claim of modern linguistic theory, that we just have one, that humans are born with this universal grammar. And then all the different languages are just variations on that universal grammar. So Noam Chomsky, who really pushed this and started this in the 1950s, and is still publishing on this, and his articles are not the easiest to read, unfortunately. He claimed that, okay, if a Martian were to come to Earth, the Martian would think that we're just pretty much all speaking the same thing. Because they're really just all variations. So, for instance, some of the mistakes children might make as they're learning as they're learning their native language are actually grammatical in some other language. So that is, they're not making mistakes. They're not creating language forms or linguistic forms that don't exist in any language whatsoever. So I think once you get a little bit of the understanding of linguistics, it makes it easier to go and study other languages. All the languages I do are all related to each other. So that even makes it easier because you'll see some similarity in the vocabulary. But yeah, I know it's addictive. Just like you had the musician on earlier, you just do one, you want to keep doing more. Yeah.
Well, Jean-Francois Mondon, thank you again for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we've reached that time again. It's the end of another episode of the Lookout Podcast. I want to thank you again for watching. And one more time, I'm going to repeat our slogan. It's Minot State University. Be seen, be heard, be inspired. Thanks again.